Nelson tonight. I'm really excited to introduce Professor Antonya Nelson tonight. She was my professor at the University of Houston when I was studying for my MFA in fiction. And one of my absolute favorite things to do in grad school was to listen to her talk about stories and the way they create the effects that they have on us. It feels like magic, and sometimes it is magic, but it's also the case that there are specific things that authors do to create those effects. So, we're really honored to have her with us. She's really dedicated her career to this specific art form, and she's published several books of short stories, including two that I just happen to have right here, Funny Once and Nothing Right. She has taught at the University of Houston since 2002, and her work has been published in The New Yorker, Harper's, Redbook, Esquire, and many more. She was included in the New Yorker's 1999 list as one of the 20 young fiction writers for the new millennium. So we're really excited to have her here and enjoy her talk because I know I'm going to.
Thanks, Ginny. Um, I thought I'd arrange this talk um, as a series of questions I've been asked over my long career as a story maker. Some of them, well, you'll see. Some of them are ones that, are well, you'll just see. And I thought I'd leave a little time at the end in case there's questions that I haven't anticipated that you might have after I've tried to anticipate those questions. So I thought I'd just get started with something very general, which is what is a short story? And I think a way of thinking about that is to think about it as compared with a novel. And the way you, I think, would, a short story typically, not always, but typically is about an individual person within a community, of course, but an individual person and that person's a sense of there being a piece of time in which you are witnessing the character of that person in a display of character that provides you with a meaningful and moving experience of the character, which is to say that the individual is having a moment of revelation, of trouble, of I guess you could say progress, but that's kind of misleading, maybe. I will say of short stories that and I'll repeat this, I'm sure, but every short story is a coming of age story. And coming of age is not, it's not, it's not just when kids hit puberty. Coming of age can happen to you at a various number of times in your life. And it's a kind of passage from some sort of innocence to some sort of experience, some sort of, enlightenment about losing innocence. And it's oftentimes, I think, a little bittersweet, as losing innocence is. Why isn't the short story more popular is a question I could try to answer in relationship to this. And I think it's because it's about an individual typically. And in the world, we are mortal, individuals perish. The novel, as a sort of general object art form, is generally about communities. And in general, communities persist. Even if individuals die, the community itself persists. And so there's a kind of just optimistic feel to novels. Even if terrible things happen in them, there's almost always this sense of continuity or something continuing when you've closed the book. And I think people, they prefer that message in general, that although they're going to be moved by tragic things, when they get to the end of the book, there's almost always this sense of continuing life, continuing opportunity, continuing. I don't know if any of you have read that Cormac McCarthy novel, The Road, perhaps the most depressing book. But even in the end of that, if you have read it, and I don't think I'm ruining it by saying it has a happy ending, it's a novel about the end of the earth, but it has a very healing, sort of restorative ending. And it's precisely because of the form of the novel. That's kind of an expectation when you've got a community that you're concerned with. Whereas, and my students and other readers say this all the time to me, short stories are so depressing. And they kind of are, because the transition from innocence to experience can be heartrending and depressing. And I'm not saying they always are, but they often are. And sometimes that's a little bit of a hard sell when you're trying to teach the art of the short story, because people don't always want to buy into something sort of less optimistic. Anyway, that's an answer to a question. Why aren't, because you'd think a short story as a form would be more popular given our kind of chaotic landscape that we'd like to quick, get through things, get to things, have faster recipes. We love our microwave ovens, but that isn't the same thing in terms of the literary art forms of story and novel. And I think that's the reason why. When I say that every short story is a coming of age experience, the part of that that first needs to be kind of considered is the idea of age. And it's one of the first things I ask my students to consider when they're writing their short stories or when they're reading short stories in an anthology. I ask them to attend to the age of the character whose story it is. And the reasons for that, and I made a little drawing, but now I'm not sure it's going to show up right side. Is that reading correctly to you, or is that backwards?
Now it's fine.
Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, good. Because when I tested this on my FaceTime, that was no good. I haven't taught on Zoom for a minute. Anyway, this is a timeline of ages. This line represents the human life from beginning to end. And I've marked some important ages on there. And really, I just wanted you to see the drawing. You can make your own drawing, but just so you'll know what I'm talking about. And I've marked a few significant ages on it. And I just want to explain why this seems like such an important part, not just when you're writing a short story, but when you're reading a short story, or when you hear about anything that happens in the world. One of the first things, oftentimes the very first thing you need to know, is the age of the person to whom this thing happened, because it makes a world of difference, right? So there are biological transitional moments that I've lined up here, psychological transition moments, and sociological transitional moments. And those are, I just want to be kind of clear. The biological ones are ones that are, physiological and probably worldwide recognized. The psychological ones are influenced by culture, but the sociological ones are specific to nations and cultures and communities. So those are thresholds or transitional moments that you can anticipate. And I'm just going to illustrate a few of those to sort of give you a reference point. The first one I've noted is age 3 or 4. And if I were in a classroom, I'd be asking people to make guesses about this, but I'm not. So I'm just going to tell you. Between ages 3 and 4 is a sort of psychological, biological threshold. It's when you start having and retaining memories of your own life. You have your first memory, thereabouts. And these are always going to be approximations and generalizations. And I know there are people who have different experience. My cousin thinks that he can remember being in the crib when he was 9 months. I don't believe him, but whatever. Anyway, 3 and 4 is when you start owning the narrative of your own life to some extent. You start telling a story to yourself or have a memory of a place. Prior to that, you are other people's anecdotes, right? You have to count on other people to tell you what you were like as an infant, as a 1-year-old, as a 2-year-old. But you start claiming a narrative for yourself when you're about 3 or 4. That's most people's first memory. The next age I've marked here is age 5, which is a sociological marker in our culture. Kids have to be going to school, kindergarten, whatever. Age 8 is a marker that I like to talk about because it begins to be the point at which a child starts registering the larger world more significantly. And the example I like to use is a William Faulkner story called Barn Burning. And in that story, there's a sharecropper. This is in the South, just after the end of slavery. And the angry man who is the replacement, he's a white man with a large family. He's the replacement for the enslaved population that has gone. He's bitter. He's working for other white men. And the story opens with him being charged with burning a barn. And the little boy whose point of view the story is told from is about 8 years old. He has an older brother. He has an infant brother. He has 2 older sisters. He has a mother. But to none of them is this story happening, because what he's being asked to do is to decide whether his father, who has done this illegal thing, and the boy knows it's true, and the law, which is saying to him, this is a bad thing. This is morally bad. And the boy is genuinely conflicted about whether to be loyal to the law or loyal to his father. And he's at the age where that decision means something. His infant brother, absolutely, who cares? The older brother already bought into the father's worldview. The mother, the older sisters, it's not their story because they too have sort of bought into but the boy has this conflict. And it has everything to do with the sort of developmental stage he is at, the age he is at. And I sort of love, the anecdote from my own life I used to illustrate this is when I was driving with my son, who was 8, in the back seat, and his sister, who was 12, in the front seat of the car. And my son looked over my shoulder and with such horror said to me, "Mom, you're speeding." And it was, for him, a disaster. Like, why would you be breaking the law? Yeah, my daughter, the jaded 12-year-old, was just like, "Go faster." And he was just horrified. Anyway, that age is so I just hope when in future you're reading pieces, you might just kind of start noting what age is that. When I teach this to my students, what I'm asking them to do is to think about the stories they're telling and to consider these markers that they don't have to invent them. They already exist, and they can make use of them, in the situations that they dream up for their fiction. The next marker I have is age 12, which we all understand to be adolescence, the onset of the physical signs of changing bodies. Age 15 is when all of those changes start to make some sort of sense. The sexual awakening that has begun oftentimes in our culture begins to be enacted at age 15, 16, 14, somewhere in there. Sexual activity, crushes, what have you. Age 16 in our culture, that's the driver's license. Age 18 is one of those markers of adulthood. The beginning one. You can vote, you can join the military, you can not do the other things. But age 21 is when you get to drink and smoke legally. And then there's this age of 26, which I think is a kind of fascinating age, because that is the age that what I like about the age of 26 is that the rental car agencies of the world discovered that was a transitional moment before science did, because so many people who got rental cars who were under the age of 26 drove terribly and wrecked them. And so you are still not allowed to rent a car until you're over the age of 26. Science later figured out that your brain is not done yet till you're 26. So that fact, which I kind of find hilarious, is it of interest to me. And what it means is that between the ages of 18 and 26, there's this sort of shifting terrain of adulthood. You are legally okay for some things, biologically not complete until you're 26. You're off your parents' insurance then too. It really is a marker and milestone that's been substantiated. And so this in between people who are the ages of 18 to 26, they're still trying to figure out whether they're adults or not, and they're entitled to things, they're legal for things, but they're not prepared for a lot of things. It's a very interesting transitional age. And as my students are mostly in that age group, this always comes as quite an alarm to them. They're like, wait, my brain's not finished. I thought I was a grown-up, and not quite. Then we have the age of 30, which is another interesting age. 30 for me is sort of the adult equivalent of the age of 8, that when you are 30, you are without any doubt an adult, and perhaps you need to make a decision about what kind of adult, a kind of moral, an inquiry into yourself. It's interesting if you'll note characters in the work that you read. Well, just because Gatsby is something that everybody mostly has read. I don't know if you recall, but the narrator of Gatsby, Nick, he turns 30 in the middle of the book, and he's, as a character, trying to make a kind of moral decision about who Gatsby is and what Gatsby is about, and what kind of person he begins the book being very judgmental, but ends by being pretty elegiac about Gatsby. And that interrogation, I think, is about his own awakening kind of moral compass. And I think age 30 is one of those times. I'm going to sort of speed through a few more of these ages. Age 40, if you're female, as a character in a book or a story, for example, if you were writing a story in which a woman wanted to have a child and her age in your story was 28, the pressure on that is not very high. But if you made her 38 or 39, then the stakes of the story would rise significantly. And I think just knowing that kind of technical fact could make a story that didn't feel quite as, riveting, more riveting, because the stakes are higher. So, and 40 is an important age. By then, there's been some determination in women whether you're going to have children or not, how you're going to have them, etc. 50 is another important age marker. This is, sort of, you're not going to get any, maybe I don't need to explain, but anyway, 50, the midlife crisis. If I were illustrating this, there'd be a little red sports car here. It's sort of like the beginning of, the decline, or you're not going to get any more physically strong, or you just have to sort of reckon. 65 is that retirement age. And then beyond this, it's when you sort of recognize that you are the older generation, that your friends are passing, that your health luck is now going to play a huge role. You are the elder. I think you can probably see how becoming the elder, losing parents, that's also a coming of age moment, right? When you figure out, like, oh, you're grandma. Oh, like this is your last pet, your friends are falling away one way or another, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little less predictable beyond 65, precisely because of genetics and health and habits. They sort of become their own kind of wavering. At any rate, I feel like this is one of the first things I try to have people establish when they're working on stories, when they're thinking about the stories they want to tell. If you started a piece and just said, this male character drove down the street and crashed into several cars, the first thing you'd need to know is how old, because if he's 85, it means one thing. If he's 50, it means another thing. If he's 8, it means an entirely other thing. And the same can be said by violating any of these sort of conventional transitional moments. If your first sexual experience, or your character's first sexual experience is at 5 instead of 15, that's also story worthy, because it's in opposition to what the culture, the biology, the psychology of our society has established as patterns. If you're a virgin at age 40, that too is significant for story making, right? Because you're off the schedule somehow. At any rate, the ages is one of the very first things I ask students to be aware of when they're starting to write their stories. I thought I would walk you through the process of a semester with my students in creating a story, because it replicates my own process to some extent, and I'm fairly confident that it reflects the process of most story makers. So in a workshop situation where I have 15 or 20 students, I tell them that we're going to work on a single short story from inception through revision for the duration of the semester. And the first thing I ask them to do is to pull something from their lives or something from the newspaper. I actually ask them to come up with 3 anecdotes and to bring them to class to share with the rest of the class. And they can be things that happened in their family, that have happened to them, that happened in the newspaper that they are really kind of interested in, something that happened in their neighborhood. I start with something that caught their attention, wherever in the world it caught their attention. And I just want them to write it down in a 300-word passage. And I ask them to bring 3 of those to class to share with us. And they come in with their anecdotes, whether it's, I'm trying to think of one that very recently, I'll try to give you some examples from a workshop I just finished teaching. One man said that he had been really interested in this woman in France who'd been in a coma, and she was in the coma for 3 months. And during the time of her being in this coma as a teenager, she was in the coma as a teenager, she felt like she experienced 20 years of life. She had children, she had a husband. This was all going on in her head in this coma. And he just was fascinated by this idea. And he wrote this kind of great story that used that as its beginning part. And when we were talking to him, of course, it had nothing really to do with him, but he was just really interested in the idea of it, something that came out of the newspaper for him. But in exploring it, he found a way to make it personally sort of relative to him. Another example, and I could give you this from maybe my own experience, when the Gulf War started 35 years ago, I was giving birth in the hospital in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and the Scud missiles and my son showed up at the exact same moment. So everybody was out watching the television while I was having a baby. And he was fine. Everything was fine. But a couple of months later in the newspaper, our little newspaper, there was this article that talked about that a woman had stolen a baby from that same hospital, and she was a nurse in the maternity ward. And it was so easy for me to imagine, oh my God, I was there. I probably, it's a small community. But the thing that struck me was that she had stolen a twin. And in that gesture of hers, of stealing the twin, I felt some necessity or want to take on that character. And that part of it was that I could imagine that maternity ward, and I could imagine that baby. I could imagine so much about that. I mean, I would never steal a kid, but I really identified with the idea that she waited till it was twins. Anyway, she drove around the country for a while with this twin, but her family turned her in, and the twin was returned to his home. I wrote a short story in which a woman, age 40, who does not have children, goes to Disneyland with her husband and wants to steal a twin, sees a twin, whatever. And in deciding which point of view to take in making that story, I knew I would not want to be the character of the woman who wants to steal the baby, nor would I want to be the character of the woman whose baby is stolen. That's a kind of victim villain dynamic that's not as interesting to me. So the point of view I inhabited was the husband of the woman, because he understands her desire. He doesn't
Command
condone it exactly, but he understands it at least. And that was my way into a story that I wanted to write, that I felt had some intimacy for me, but also some fictional possibility. And that's really what I'm hoping to achieve when I ask my students to bring in these anecdotes, where they can find a way in that makes it personal to them, but still retain some detachment, so that it's not a memoir they're writing. It's a fictional story that has some material in it that matters deeply to them, but is not really, if they want to write memoir, write memoir. But if you want to write fiction, you got to write fiction. So those anecdotes are the way the class starts. And I ask them in the next iteration of the anecdote to start thinking about what clock they would put on the story, what amount of time would need to pass in each of their anecdotes. And the man who wrote about the woman with the coma, he set his story 40 years later, and she's in a restaurant in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she sees a man at another table who is signing to a video screen. And in her coma state, the child she had was deaf, and he would be this man's age. I know this sounds kind of magical, but it is the most recent of these things. And the clock that Todd put on the story was just the woman's being in the restaurant, seeing this man, and staying in the restaurant for a while, recalling all the stuff from her coma-induced, history that was not a real history. And I think he was just really interested in how convincing an imagined life can be. And I'm also interested in that. So I was very attached to what he came up with in this story. But his interest was very distant from the experience of the woman in the coma. Mine was a little more intimate with the nurse in the hospital. But all I mean to say is that the source for short stories can be anywhere, and it can be very deeply intimate and personal, and it can also be sort of more abstract, somebody going through something that you just really interested in watching it or seeing it, or your neighbor is doing something weird. It comes from everywhere. So what I ask the students to do is to establish a kind of clock on the story, which is to say, where does it begin? Where does it end in terms of time? And they don't have to know exactly what's going to happen. Time as a measure in stories is just very useful. A story that takes place over the weekend, it's going to begin on Friday night and it's going to be over by Sunday evening, whatever. A story that takes place over summer, and many stories take place over summer because people are released from their, academic pursuits. Children are a little freer to go wild, etc. It can take place over a ritual. It can be a funeral. It can be a wedding. It can be Thanksgiving. It can be 4th of July. It can take place over a year. It can take place over an academic year. It can take place over a pregnancy. It can take place over a journey. You start here, you're going to end when you get to your destination. It could take place over the duration of a relationship. The story begins with meeting this person. The story is over when that person is gone. All I mean to say is that that duration of time, if you can figure out that part, then you have a way of pacing the story. If it takes place over the course of a day at a restaurant, then, it began in Todd's story at lunch and was over when the restaurant closed at 9 p.m. And so his story, which is not really about the restaurant at all, had time markers that he could count on to pull himself through the story in terms of its pacing. I feel like I should ask if there are questions. I don't want to pass over, if I don't know if there's a good way to do that, or if I should just go on. Bradley, any?
Yeah, I think if anyone has any questions, feel free to come off mute and just kind of popcorn it. And there will be a time at the end as we're mulling this over.
Frederica?
Fred, do you have a question?
Ooh,
I can see you're not muted, but I can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Fred. George, what about you?
Well, something that occurs to me, and you started it off with The Great Gatsby, which is sometimes when we read a story, more often a novel, I suppose, than just a short story, we have to interpret the story for the person who's telling the story because they don't understand the story they're telling us.
Yes, that's
And
very
therefore
specific.
they may tell it untrue, they may lie to us.
Yeah.
And that we have to keep on our toes to see whether they're really are reliable or whether they just don't understand the story they're telling us.
Yeah. I love those kinds of stories. The unreliable narrator, or I kind of like to think of them as monologues myself, that they're demonstrating by providing you the ironic distance is between the reader and the writer, kind of. The narrator, the speaker, becomes more untrustworthy as the thing proceeds, in the way a dramatic monologue in poetry does, so that you recognize by the end that the intention is for the character to have revealed something inadvertently while speaking. It's one of the, I think, great devices of creating a character who becomes more vivid and apparent and transparent to the reader than the character is sort of to himself.
There is sort of a meta story that we have to discover that the person has just given us the ingredients of and don't really know how to make the cake with the ingredients.
Exactly.
Anyone else? I don't see anyone. I have, and this might take us further afield, so we can table it for later. But the way you frame like a novel is really being kind of grounded in a community and having this like longevity versus a short story that really falls on individual. It's funny, unrelated to our Cathedral Reads book, this other book club I'm in just did, we did short stories. So we did like 12 short stories by all these different authors. And so it's interesting, you like put words to this thing. I was like, I don't know how to describe what I'm feeling or picking up. And what it makes me wonder is, because of that, are there habits of reading that work when we're reading a novel that we need to let go of to read a short story well?
I believe so, and I can tell you my own experience of being moved. I think it's an art form, the short story, that is younger than novels and more a little more difficult to find beautiful. I'll just say that. I find it beautiful because I read so much, but I don't read as many short stories. I read a lot of them and I teach a lot of them, and then, at the end of the day, when I'm ready to go to bed, I'm reading a mystery, or a novel. It's work. And the way short stories work on me is that I'll read one for the first time and be powerfully moved by it and not understand why. And because I'm a writer, I'm not satisfied with that. So I will take it apart. I will pull it apart and see how it is made. And I will see, and in the class that I teach, because I ask these students to do these stages of revisions and creation, and I make them go through the process of writing and considering, and I give them prompts every week, the time thing, the 3-act structure, props and objects, what things are in the story, what are the age of the characters, what's the movement, what's the psychological complexity, what story might it be a retelling of? Is this a familiar mythic structure that they've hit upon? Is that why it's powerful to them? Et cetera, et cetera. But that process of going through the material over and over again is the process of kind of reverse engineering the construction of it, because when you read a story over and over and over, you can start recognizing how carefully, at least the bulletproof ones that I love best, how carefully the writer has curated the experience for the reader, how meticulously the imagery conforms to and becomes artful and invisible simultaneously. Because I don't think the short story reader is any longer satisfied with that kind of O. Henry story, Gift of the Magi, for example. Oh, it's Christmas, and the man has this watch he loves, and the woman has this beautiful hair, and the man sells his watch to buy his wife some hairbrushes, and she cuts off her hair. Apparently that's worth money to buy him a watch chain. The end of the story. No one's satisfied with that anymore. It's a kind of evolving form that doesn't want to be pinned down that way in kind of easy irony. And I think that's one of the things I love about it, that, I'll read a story and be pleasantly surprised by how it moves me without being obvious. And that for me is the challenge and kind of artful beauty of many, great short stories, both contemporary and classic. I could talk a little bit about one of the stories in the anthology the collection that you all are going to read.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be
That'd be
helpful. I don't know if
great.
anybody's already read these.
I've read some, not all.
Yeah.
Half.
Well, I thought I would talk about the title story, Encounters with Unexpected Animals.
Okay.
That one's pretty short, and I don't think I'll ruin it for anybody if I talk about it. I don't know. Is that
We doubt it.
if
No,
you
I think
don't
that's
want?
great. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
This was, and
We're
selfishly, I'm glad because
grateful.
I read the story a few weeks ago and was like, what are
What? Yeah. Okay, so I can sort of describe it because it's relatively short. So the character is this middle-aged man, or maybe a little less than middle-aged. Probably I don't know how old he is, 40, 45. And in the first paragraph of the story, you're told immediately how old everybody is, right? Lambright had surprised everyone by offering to drive his son's girlfriend home. The girlfriend is 17. The boyfriend, who's the son of the main character, is 2 years younger. She's described as she had been held back in school. Her driver's license was currently suspended. She had a reputation, a body, and a barcode tattooed on the back of her neck. Lambright sometimes glimpsed it when her green hair was ponytailed. So you get a sense of this character like in about 4 different, okay, so she's 2 years older than a teenage boy who is his son, and she's over for dinner. It goes on further to describe her transgressions in the past, which is that a necklace has disappeared from the house and a bottle of nerve pills. So she's a delinquent in this man's view of her, and he volunteers to drive her home. And the family is grateful for that, the son and the wife. So he gets in the car with her and drives her home, except he doesn't drive her home. He goes a roundabout way and tells her he wants her to stop seeing his son, to dump him. And the girl says she's not going to do that. And instead, she tells him a few things that she could say that would get him in trouble. And the things she says that could get him in trouble. You can say you'll quit him, Lambright said. I'd like to have your word on that subject. And if I don't, you'll leave me on the side of the road? We're just talking. We're sorting out a problem. Or you'll beat me up and throw me in the creek? You're too much for him. He's overmatched. And so if I don't dump him, you'll what? Rape me, murder me, bury me in the dunes? Lizzie, he said, his tone pleasantly superior. He liked how much he sounded like a father. Then she says, I see how you look at me, you know. And then everyone sees it. Nobody would be surprised you drove me out here. I'm telling you to stay away from my boy. In the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, she completely turns the power structure against him and starts basically threatening him with what she can do to him and what she maybe will do to him, given who she may be. And so this moment where he recognizes that he too has been overmatched by this girl, right? I kind of love teenage girl characters. They are really the canary in the coal mine for so many things in our culture, and they make perfect characters. They're just great characters. And the story resolves without resolution, particularly. It stirred in him a floating sensation, the curious and scattered feeling of being borne on waves or air or wings. He was disoriented, short of breath. He knew he was at the beginning of something, though just then he couldn't say exactly what. And we have no idea either, but he's been overmatched by this teenage girl that he thought he would have some sort of power over, and that he hasn't given sufficient credit to. The title of the story is Encounters with Unexpected Animals, and it's a thematic thing that goes through the story where the characters have been telling about when they've come upon goats in trees or a macaw on somebody's head. And in this instance, Lambright, the man, has an encounter with an unexpected animal in the form of this girl who is a force of nature, a kind of animal that he has no way of knowing how to deal with it. And that's his coming of age moment. Now it's a little abstract, and I get that, but I think it's a powerful story, and I think it does what a short story does best, to reveal this character's shift from feeling he's very proud of his being, father figure, and that he's got, this false sense of control. He's driving the car. All she has to do is get out and mention a few things she could say, and he's no longer in control.
Mm-hmm.
That's what stories do. I don't think they have as much, for me, that's satisfying. That's enough. But I never said people, it's like, well, what happens next? Well, you don't
There is no next.
There is no next. Exactly. And the story sort of acknowledges that. And I think that ambiguity is troubling for people. I think, it leaves you with like, well, now what? But I find that satisfying, but it's harder. It's harder to talk people into finding that satisfying than you might expect. But to me, that's what the best short stories do. They leave you in that space of like, wow, something weird just happened and I feel odd about it, but it was kind of cool. Yeah, George.
We see, I having taught English for 20 something years, I am accustomed to seeing everything in terms of metaphors and noting patterns. And in that short story is a fascinating parallel between that and the story of Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby.
Oh, you think?
Yeah, where at the end of the story, the last you see of her is her running across the creek and through the brush, and so she must be familiar with the territory. The way
That's
Brer
pretty great.
Rabbit says, "Do whatever you want to me," to Brer Fox, just don't throw me in the briars.
That's
Mhm.
great.
That's exactly where the fox throws him. And so we see the playing out of who's really in charge of
Yeah.
what, and who is just assuming that they have control.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to see patterns and see
Yeah.
what the story does with those patterns.
Well, one of the last parts of the class I teach is because I don't ever want the students to start out wanting to tell a revised version of some other story, because I think that kind of limits the unconscious business that they're, going through when they start writing. But near the end of the semester, maybe the eighth of 10, parts of revision strategy, I ask them to think about what story, myth, fable, whatever, that their story might be a retelling of, so that they could go then to that source work and weave it into the story, which sounds a little, I don't know, silly maybe, but there's so many stories I read, and eventually I recognize the pattern, as you said, and where that comes from, whether it's the hero's journey, whether it's Red Riding Hood, whether it's Dracula, whether it's the Christ story, Peter Pan. I mean, there's so many. Yeah, people are always saying, write what you know, but a lot of what you know is literature and mythology, and it's truly useful, not in the beginning stages, but near the end stages, to see if something that you've worked on is actually participating in some larger story that you can take advantage of for structural purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And alarming, of course, to discover that the person telling the story in the encounters with animals thinks of himself as the careful and protective father, when in fact he might be viewed as a big bad wolf.
yeah, exactly. And that's what she's pointing out. He thinks he's in one narrative, and she's got news for him. I don't know if there are other questions. I was gonna also just say that I have about, 15 or so stories that I think are really excellent stories by a whole variety of writers, which I'd be happy to.
Please do.
Okay. Okay. So I'll just read them. Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin. White Angel by Michael Cunningham. The Hitchhikers by Eudora Welty. The Shawl by Louise Erdrich. The Ice Wagon Going Down the Street by Mavis Gallant. I'm hoping, because this is recorded, that you can just come back to this list. If
I
that's
hope so, because I'm dead as a hammer otherwise.
Yeah, I know. I hope that that's okay with you. I was just going to read through them and hope that the recording would.
Good to know that you have a
That's great.
list.
And we
We're
can,
happy to hear it.
Okay. The Girl Who Left Her Sock on the Floor by Deborah Eisenberg. The Swimmer by John Cheever. Deaths of Distant Friends by John Updike. Helping by Robert Stone. Minnesota by Alice Munro. Torridge by William Trevor. The Metal Bowl by Miranda July. The Dragon Master by Sam Lipsyte. Anton Chekhov's Lady of the Pet Dog. Sherwood Anderson's Death in the Woods. Lori Moore's Jewish Hunter. And I just offer these up as a kind of, these are the first stories that occurred to me in making a list. I could make a list many more, but there's a variety in there of contemporary and more classic, and also a variety in terms of methodology. Some surreal, some highly realistic, first person, third person, etc. And many that are easily, I feel like, well, if anybody wants to know why I would recommend a particular story, you can let me know. I'd be happy to explain it. Yes, Sarah.
Where are these stories found?
Well, some of them were published in the New Yorker. So if you have a subscription to the New Yorker online, the Fiction Archive has a lot of these in it. Others, you would have to seek out the anthologies of the writers and just see the collection that it might be in. Some are collected in anthologies, sort of general anthologies. You can look online. Some of them will have PDFs online if that's a way of finding them. I've sort of I mean, I own all the books that these are in, but I've seen them in other places, and I teach them fairly routinely, and I have PDFs of them.
Sarah, yeah.
Yeah, I probably have some too, having been in your class somewhere.
Probably.
My question is about the students that you're getting now. Um, I've been reading more and more that they are not reading literature in their classes in school before university. And when I was in school, we were grounded in literature and grounded in the short story and in novels and in various literary forms. And to tell you the truth, this this guy in this short story is a character that came time and time again in these sleazy magazines that you would read at the hairdresser when I was a little girl about, the guy who would take the babysitter home. But anyway, are you running into a problem with your students not being grounded in literature?
Well, I feel like I don't have a very, yes, I'll just say that. But most of the students I teach are grad students who want to be writers. And so most of them they really do still love
Right.
the written word and want to participate in that art form. The undergraduate students, there are fewer of them than there used to be in creative writing as a major and in story making, for sure. They are looking for narrative in different places, graphic novels, screenwriting. I mean, it's, I think that the story of people, narrative desire is still very strong, and that cheers me up. But yeah, it's sad to me to think of being somebody who doesn't have the place of reading fiction to go to. And because I've had that as a resource and companion all my life. And if I had to give up, I'd give up everything before I'd give up reading. I would give up people I know before I'd give up reading. And if you don't have that, it feels like there's an empty space that that I don't think anything else quite replicates it. That private sort of engagement and imagination. And, I learned about history by reading books, fiction. That's how I learned about the world. And I don't know. Oh, you say Flannery O'Connor. Also, Flannery O'Connor, A Good Man is Hard to Find. And the other great one, Good Country People, such great stories.
I want to be mindful of time. Any
Okay.
last questions, or I want to make sure we get Jenny? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. And this is what I was thinking about when you were speaking about the effect that stories have on people, and sometimes people aren't down for the unresolvedness of some of them, especially maybe the more current modern ones, as you said. And I've always felt like there's a connection between the short story and visual art, and I think that's a feature that they both have in common.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you had anything to say about that or.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's frequently, I think, the case that the title can be super helpful when you're looking at contemporary art. It's like, oh, all right, now I have something. It's sort of like Brett's story, Encounters with Unexpected Animals. I think that title really helps you navigate the story. And that's one of the ways I think when you're reading these stories, when you're going to talk about them as a group, if something's perplexing you, like, going back and reading it again is one thing, but also attending to the title as a kind of guidepost, to help just feel like what the intention is. And I do feel like contemporary work is frequently like that, but I also feel like Anton Chekhov is frequently like that. You read him and you're like, where's the next page? This is not over. What? And then you have to go back and like, well, what did he mean by ending it there? Like, what am I supposed to make of that shark and the dead body floating down the what? And it's up to the reader to do a little more work. I think maybe the thing about short stories is that you're going to be called upon to do a little more interpretive work, just like with some contemporary art, that you're going to have to you're going to have to like go at it with more diligence. It's not easy.
Well, you don't have a lot of time within the confines, for better, for worse, of a short story. So you're going to get your act together, you have to do it quickly.
Yeah, I would really recommend not reading it the way you read a novel, one after another. I would really highly recommend reading one and letting it sit with you and go read something else and read a book and then go back and read another one, because reading them all in a row, even if you love the writer, they don't hold up as well. They really need to be approached on their own terms. I think the short story is best encountered, in a magazine surrounded by a bunch of other stuff, ads and feature stories, like no other fiction, just it by itself. You read it, you think about it, you ponder it, whatever. You don't like immediately turn to another one. That's the best way to read a short story.
Do you think do you think most short story, like thinking about our collection in particular, do you believe most short stories are meant to be reread? Like before we really get I think of a novel, there's a sense in which if I finish a novel, it's pretty hard to go and right back to it to reread it again. But are short stories deepened by rereading in close proximity?
I mean, I reread the stories I love
Mhm.
again and again and again, and I'm always deeply appreciative. It's hard for me to say
Sure.
whether they're meant to be. I mean, I guess the ideal effect and the ideal reader is going to read a story and be moved by it and perhaps motivated to read it again, or perhaps not, but to have been moved by it is sufficient. And if you're a writer, I mean, I study the stories I love. First, I read them and I'm like, wow, that was amazing. I hate that writer. She's so good. And then I go back and like, oh, how did she do that? How did she do that? Can I borrow some of that? I want that. So.
Okay, yeah, last question.
I've got a question about what kind of people write really good short stories. Are these people that their whole careers are in English? Or are these people who are doing all kinds of things and they really get into short stories?
I think that temperamentally, people have a disposition towards one or the other of the narrative forms, whether long form, whether they see a kind of collective social order that they want to address, a kind of George Eliot idea of, Middlemarch, or there's somebody who wants to focus, like Ray Carver or Anton Chekhov, on the small gestures and little moments of individual people and be done with it in a few pages. And I think some people do both. I do both. I write both novels and short stories, but I'm way more comfortable in that more narrow, personal, intimate space than I am in the collective sociological space. So I think, I mean, it is interesting to me. I think the earlier you can figure out what kind of writer you are, novelist or short story writer, what your temperament is better suited for, the better off you're going to be. And to be happy to be a short story writer as opposed to thinking of it as like, oh, this is like practice for writing a novel. It is not. It is not. It is not practice for writing a novel. It is an entirely other art form. So I respect
Good
it.
to know.
Awesome. Professor Nelson, thank you so much for being with us. Even this little bit has helped some things in Johnson's book kind of click in place for me. So I'm really grateful for that. We're right at 7:30, y'all. Just kind of two quick things by way of not necessarily housekeeping, to maybe formal a word. If you want to read these stories kind of alongside folks and talk about them, there are two opportunities for that. So we have Sunday morning, a Sunday morning 10 a.m. kind of book group that George Hawkins and Caroline Hendricks are going to lead. That'll start this upcoming Sunday, the 21st. And then Danielle, Sue, and Eisner are leading a Wednesday group at 6:30 starting next Wednesday. Is that correct, Danielle?
Yeah, and it will be on Zoom.
Yep,
And
perfect. So, go ahead.
like I think you've already said this, but I think for at least for my group, the intention is I know summer's busy and people are traveling, so the intention is for people to be able to like join when they want, but don't feel bad if you can't make all of it, just come and go.
Yep. It'll be really good. So you
Right.
sign up for George. Yeah.
I would suggest those people that are meeting with me next Sunday at 10 o'clock have read at least the first two short stories.
Okay.
Great.
What room, George?
I think it's going to be in Jeffers, but Brad's the man here.
Yeah, it should be in Jeffers, and then y'all should get emails about that this week. I will also say, by way of wrap up, we will wrap up on Sunday. We'll wrap up the weekend of August 15th and 16th. And the author, Brett Johnson, is going to be with us at the Cathedral. So we'll have some more to share about what exactly he'll be doing Saturday morning. We're going to hopefully have a workshop, but he'll be with us in the 10 a.m. hour chatting about this collection. So I'm really excited. I'm glad we're reading short stories. I haven't read a short story probably since like college. And so this has been really fun to rediscover it. And I'm really enjoying them. Yeah, I kind of love that you're just dropped in the middle of someone's life and then you go away. I think it's really fun. So thank you all. Please stay safe. Please stay dry. I will see y'all hopefully over the next few days. Okay. Take
All
care,
right.
y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
Appreciate it.
everybody. Good night.